The stagecoach rattled into Hawthorne, Nevada on a blistering August afternoon in 1882, carrying a woman whose hands wouldn't stop trembling no matter how tightly she clasped them in her lap. Eliza Bennett pressed herself against the worn leather seat, her dark green traveling dress buttoned high to her throat despite the oppressive heat that made even breathing feel like work. She watched through the dusty window as the small mining town materialized from the shimmering desert landscape, a collection of weathered buildings that looked like they might blow away in the next strong wind. This was supposed to be her fresh start, her escape from everything that had gone wrong back in St. Louis. The advertisement had seemed like divine intervention when she'd found it 3 months ago, crumpled at the bottom of her reticule after another night of terror. Respectable rancher seeking companionship and partnership. Marriage-minded. Write to Xavier Dalton, Hawthorne, Nevada. She'd written that very night by candlelight, her fingers aching as she carefully composed a letter that told just enough truth to be honest, but omitted the parts that would make any man turn away. Yes, she was 23 and unmarried. Yes, she could cook and manage a household. Yes, she understood the hardships of frontier life and was willing to work alongside a husband to build something meaningful. No, she didn't mention Marcus Thornhill or the 8 months of marriage that had nearly killed her. No, she didn't explain why she'd fled in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on her back and her grandmother's silver locket. And she certainly didn't mention the bruises that seemed to bloom on her skin like grotesque flowers, purple and yellow and black, marking her as his property even after death had finally freed her. The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside the Wells Fargo office, and Eliza forced herself to stand on legs that felt like water. The driver, a grizzled man who'd barely spoken during the journey from Carson City, hauled down her single trunk with a grunt. She stepped into the Nevada sun and immediately felt it press against her like a physical weight. Several people stopped to stare at the newcomer, which wasn't surprising in a town this size. Word would already be spreading that Xavier Dalton's mail-order bride had arrived. Miss Bennett. The voice came from behind her, deep and measured. Eliza turned and found herself looking up at a man who seemed carved from the same unforgiving landscape that surrounded them. Xavier Dalton stood well over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered and lean-hipped in the way of men who worked hard every day of their lives. He wore dusty ranch clothes, a blue shirt rolled to his elbows and denim pants tucked into scuffed boots. His face was tanned from the sun, strong-jawed with lines around his eyes that suggested he squinted against the desert glare more often than he smiled. Dark hair curled slightly at his collar beneath a black Stetson, and his eyes were an unusual shade of gray-green that reminded her of sage after rain. Mr. Dalton. She managed a small curtsy, very aware of those eyes studying her with an intensity that made her want to shrink into herself. "Thank you for meeting me. No trouble at all." His voice remained carefully neutral, polite but distant. "I hope the journey wasn't too difficult. It's a long way from Missouri." "I managed well enough." The lie came easily after months of practice. She'd managed the same way she'd managed everything else lately, by putting one foot in front of the other and refusing to look back. Xavier picked up her trunk as if it weighed nothing and gestured toward a wagon waiting in the shade of the general store. "We've got about an hour's ride to the ranch. I figured we could stop by the church on the way if you're still agreeable to the arrangement. Reverend Michaels is expecting us." Eliza's throat tightened. Of course he'd want to marry quickly. That's what mail-order arrangements were, after all, practical solutions to practical problems. He needed a wife, she needed safety and a new name. Romance had nothing to do with it. That would be fine. They walked to the wagon in silence, and Xavier helped her up to the bench seat with surprising gentleness. His hand under her elbow was brief and impersonal, but it still made her flinch. He noticed. She saw his jaw tighten slightly before he moved to secure her trunk in the wagon bed. The ride to the small, whitewashed church on the edge of town passed in uncomfortable quiet. Eliza kept her hands folded in her lap, very aware of the man beside her. He handled the horses with easy competence, his movements economical and sure. Nothing about him seemed threatening exactly, but he was so much bigger than her, so much stronger. They were all stronger. That was the problem. Reverend Michaels was a kind-faced man in his 50s who asked no difficult questions and seemed to understand that this was a business arrangement more than a love match. The ceremony took less than 10 minutes. Eliza repeated her vows in a voice that barely rose above a whisper, and Xavier's responses were equally quiet. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Xavier didn't try to kiss her. He simply shook her hand, his calloused palm rough against her fingers, and said, "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Dalton." The ranch materialized from the sagebrush and scrub like a mirage. It wasn't large or fancy, but it had a solid look that spoke of careful maintenance. The house was a simple wooden structure with a covered porch, flanked by a barn, a chicken coop, and several corrals where horses moved lazily in the afternoon heat. Mountains rose in the distance, purple shadows against the burning sky. "It's not much," Xavier said as he helped her down from the wagon, "but the land is good and the water rights are secure. I run about 200 head of cattle and breed horses on the side. It's enough to make a decent living." "It's lovely," Eliza said, and meant it. Anything would be lovely compared to the cramped rooms in St. Louis, where she'd lived in constant fear. Xavier carried her trunk inside and set it in a small bedroom off the main living area. The house was clean but sparse, clearly the domain of a man living alone. A table and chairs occupied one corner near the stone fireplace, and a kitchen area took up another wall. Everything was orderly, almost military in its precision. "This can be your room," Xavier said, standing in the doorway. "Mine's on the other side of the house. I didn't want to assume anything. I figure we can take time to get to know each other before we worry about other arrangements." Relief flooded through her so strongly that her knees weakened. "Thank you. I'll let you get settled. There's water in the basin if you want to wash up. Supper's usually around 7. He started to turn away, then paused. "Eliza, I know this isn't a conventional situation, but I want you to know that you're safe here. I don't hold with mistreating women or anyone else who's weaker." "That clear?" she nodded, not trusting her voice. He studied her for another long moment, then disappeared into the main room. She heard the front door close as he headed back outside to tend to the horses. Alone in her new room, Eliza sank onto the narrow bed and finally allowed herself to breathe. She'd done it. She was married again, tied to another man she barely knew, but at least this one seemed decent. At least this one had promised safety. She touched her throat through the high collar of her dress, feeling the tender skin beneath. The bruises were fading finally, but they still hurt. Everything still hurt. The first week passed in a strange dance of polite distance. Xavier rose before dawn to work the ranch, and Eliza threw herself into managing the household. She cooked meals that he ate with quiet appreciation, mended his clothes, tended the vegetable garden behind the house, and tried to make herself useful enough that he wouldn't regret bringing her here. They spoke in careful pleasantries, discussing the weather and the ranch work and the neighbors she hadn't met yet. He never raised his voice. He never moved too quickly around her. He gave her space and asked nothing beyond her help with the domestic work. But she could feel him watching sometimes, those sage green eyes studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Concern, maybe, or suspicion. She kept her dresses buttoned high and her sleeves long despite the August heat, and if he noticed her wardrobe choices seemed impractical for the desert, he said nothing. It was on the 8th day, a Sunday morning when they weren't expecting anyone, that everything changed. Eliza had risen early out of habit, unable to sleep past dawn even when given the opportunity. She'd made coffee and was working on breakfast when the heat of the kitchen combined with the heat of the day made her decision for her. Without thinking, she unbuttoned the top 3 buttons of her dress, finally allowing air to reach her throat. The relief was immediate and blissful. She was standing at the stove, stirring eggs when Xavier came in from the barn. She heard his boots on the wooden floor and turned with a smile that froze on her face when she saw his expression. He'd stopped dead in the doorway, his entire body gone rigid. His eyes were locked on her throat, and the color had drained from his sun-bronzed face. When he spoke, his voice had gone dangerously quiet, each word precisely enunciated in a way that made her stomach drop. "Who did that to you?" Eliza's hand flew to her throat, her fingers encountering the exposed skin and the fading bruises she'd forgotten to hide. Green and yellow now, almost healed but still visible, still damning. It's nothing, an accident." "Don't." Xavier took one step into the room, then stopped himself, visibly forcing his body into stillness. "Don't lie to me, Eliza. Those are finger marks. I've seen enough ranch injuries to know the difference. Someone put their hands around your throat hard enough to leave bruises that are still visible weeks later." His jaw clenched. "Who?" She couldn't speak. Her throat had closed up completely, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. This was it. He'd send her away. He'd demand an annulment. No man wanted damaged goods, a woman with this kind of past. "Eliza." He said her name gently now, softening his tone with visible effort. "I need you to talk to me, please." The please broke something inside her. She sank into one of the kitchen chairs, her legs giving out. "My first husband, Marcus Thornhill, we were married for 8 months before he died." Xavier pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, careful to keep the table between them. "He did this to you, many times." The words came out in a whisper. The throat was his favorite, actually. "He liked to watch me struggle to breathe. He said it reminded me who was in control." The silence that followed was deafening. Eliza kept her eyes on the table, unable to look at Xavier's face, unable to bear seeing disgust or pity or anger there. She heard him take a long, shaky breath. "Is he the reason you answered my advertisement?" "Yes. He died in April. A horse threw him and broke his neck. Everyone said what a tragedy it was, what a loss. They looked at me like I should be devastated." She laughed, a bitter sound. "I was relieved. I was so relieved I could barely breathe, and then I was terrified because I had nothing. His family wanted nothing to do with me, said I'd been a poor wife who'd driven him to drink and fits of temper. I had no money, no prospects. I found your letter and I thought maybe I could start over somewhere no one knew me, somewhere I could be someone different." "Did he just choke you, or were there other things?" Xavier's voice remained that same dangerous quiet, controlled but vibrating with suppressed emotion. "Other things. He broke my wrist once, cracked 2 ribs another time, blackened both my eyes more times than I could count. He was careful about it mostly, made sure I could cover the marks, that people wouldn't ask questions." She finally looked up, meeting Xavier's eyes. "I should have told you, I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you bargained for." Xavier stared at her for a long moment, and she watched several emotions flicker across his face. Fury, absolutely. Anguish, something that looked like guilt. When he finally spoke, his words were measured and careful. I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me. What happened to you wasn't your fault. You didn't drive him to anything. Men who hurt women are cowards and bullies, and they're responsible for their own actions. You understand? Eliza blinked back tears. That's kind of you to say. It's not kindness, it's fact. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. God, Eliza, when I think about you living like that for 8 months, being hurt like that, and then having to pretend to mourn the bastard. He cut himself off, taking another breath. I'm glad he's dead. I know that's a terrible thing to say, but I'm glad. And I'm sorry you had to live through hell before you got free. The tears spilled over then, hot tracks down her cheeks. She wiped at them, frantically embarrassed. I'm sorry. I don't mean to cry, I just... No one's ever said anything like that before. Xavier stood slowly, telegraphing his movements. He walked to the kitchen counter and poured her a cup of water, then brought it back and set it in front of her before retreating to his seat. There's nothing to apologize for. You're allowed to have feelings about what happened to you. They sat in silence for several minutes while Eliza composed herself. The eggs were probably ruined by now, forgotten on the stove, but neither of them seemed to care. Finally, she found her voice again. Are you going to send me away? What? No. Xavier looked genuinely shocked. Why would I send you away? Because I'm not what you thought you were getting. I'm broken. I'm frightened all the time. I jump at loud noises and I can't stand being touched, and I wake up from nightmares at least 3 times a week. You wanted a wife, not a project. First of all, you're not broken. You're healing from something that never should have happened. Xavier's voice was firm. Second, I asked you to marry me based on a few letters. I didn't have specific expectations beyond hoping for someone honest and hardworking, which you clearly are. And third, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. My mother left my father when I was 14. Took me and my sister and got out in the middle of the night because he'd beaten her so badly she couldn't see out of one eye. We lived with my aunt in California for 2 years before my mother felt safe enough to file for divorce. So I know what it looks like, Eliza. I know what it costs women to survive men like that, and I meant what I said on our first day here. You're safe in this house. Eliza felt something crack open in her chest, a painful blooming of hope that she'd thought was dead. You really mean that? I really mean that. Xavier's gray-green eyes held her steadily. I know I'm basically a stranger to you. I know you've got no reason to trust any man right now. But I'm going to prove to you over time that you can trust me. Fair enough, she nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Good. Xavier stood and went to the stove, inspecting the eggs. These are definitely past saving. How about I make us some fresh breakfast and you can sit there and relax for a change? You cook. I managed not to starve for 3 years before you got here, so I must know something. His lips quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. Besides, you've been working yourself to exhaustion all week trying to earn your keep. You're already earning it, Eliza. You don't have to prove anything to me. She watched him work, this large, quiet man who moved with surprising grace around the kitchen, and felt the first fragile threads of something new beginning to weave themselves around her damaged heart. The weeks that followed were different. Xavier seemed to have taken her confession as permission to actually talk to her, like a human being rather than a stranger he was being polite to. He told her about the ranch, about his plans to expand the horse breeding operation, about the neighbors who ran sheep on the next property over, and the ongoing friendly dispute about grazing boundaries. He asked her opinion on things, listened when she spoke, treated her ideas with respect even when he disagreed, and he was patient. So incredibly patient. When she flinched away from a sudden movement, he apologized and moved more slowly. When she had a nightmare that left her sobbing in her room, he made her tea and sat on the other side of the door talking to her until she calmed down, never once trying to come in uninvited. When she shattered a plate and immediately went white with terror, he'd calmly cleaned up the pieces and told her it was just a plate, no harm done. He'd broken a dozen of them himself. September arrived with slightly cooler temperatures and the first hints that summer might eventually end. Eliza found herself relaxing in increments, tiny fractions of peace that accumulated into something that almost felt like contentment. She laughed at one of Xavier's dry observations about the chickens, surprising them both. She asked him to teach her to ride properly, since she'd only ever ridden in carriages back east. She started unbuttoning her collar on hot days without thinking about it, no longer feeling the need to hide. Xavier was teaching her to handle his gentlest mare one afternoon when Samuel Burke, the neighboring sheep rancher, rode up with his wife Margaret. They were a pleasant couple in their 40s who'd been curious about Xavier's new bride but polite enough to give them time to settle in. "Heard you had a visitor from Missouri," Samuel said cheerfully, dismounting. "Thought we'd come by and say hello properly." Margaret was a warm woman with laugh lines around her eyes who immediately embraced Eliza like they were old friends. "It's so good to have another woman nearby. I swear I was going to go mad with only men to talk to. You must come to dinner next week. Do you play cards? We have a group that gets together twice a month." Eliza found herself genuinely smiling. "I'd like that very much." They stayed for coffee and conversation, and Eliza felt Xavier's eyes on her several times, warm and approving. After the Burkes left, he turned to her with an expression she was learning to read. "You handled that well. They liked you. They seem nice. They are." Sam lost his first wife to influenza about 10 years back. Married Margaret 3 years ago. She was a widow herself. He paused. Sometimes second chances work out better than anyone expects. Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks and busied herself with gathering the coffee cups. "I suppose they do." "Eliza." Xavier's voice made her stop and turn. He stood in the doorway, backlit by the late afternoon sun, looking uncertain in a way she'd never seen from him. "I want you to know that I'm not expecting anything from you, but I also want you to know that I like having you here. Not just because you cook and clean, though you do both of those things remarkably well. I like talking to you. I like your sense of humor. I like that you're not afraid to argue with me when you think I'm wrong about something. I like you. As a person." Her heart stuttered in her chest. "I like you too." "Good." The uncertainty faded into something warmer. "That's good." October brought cold nights and the intense work of preparing for winter. Xavier hired 2 ranch hands to help with the cattle, brothers named James and Thomas Crawford, who were hardworking and respectful. Eliza spent long days preserving vegetables, smoking meat, making sure they'd have enough supplies to last through the harsh Nevada winter. But the work didn't feel like a burden. It felt purposeful, like she was building something that mattered. And Xavier was always there, working alongside her when he could, praising her efforts, asking if she needed anything. The ranch hands clearly respected him, following his orders without question, but also joking with him like they were friends. She saw how he treated everyone with the same steady fairness, never raising his voice, never resorting to threats or intimidation. This was what a good man looked like, she realized. Not perfect, he lost his temper with a stubborn horse sometimes and could be gruff when he was tired, but fundamentally decent. Safe. She was falling in love with him. The realization hit her one evening in late October as she watched him work on repairing a saddle by lamplight, his brow furrowed in concentration, his capable hands moving with practiced precision. She loved the way he hummed tunelessly when he worked. She loved how he always saved her the best piece of meat at dinner. She loved that he read to her sometimes in the evenings, his deep voice bringing words to life. She loved his quiet strength and his unexpected gentleness, and the way he looked at her like she was something precious. And it terrified her. Xavier noticed her staring and glanced up with a questioning look. Something wrong? No, nothing's wrong. She stood abruptly, gathering her mending. I should go to bed, early morning tomorrow. She fled to her room before he could respond, her heart pounding. This wasn't supposed to happen. This was supposed to be a practical arrangement, safety in exchange for domestic work. She wasn't supposed to develop feelings for him. Feelings made you vulnerable. Feelings gave someone else power to hurt you. But the feelings were there whether she wanted them or not, growing stronger every day. She avoided Xavier for the next 2 days, staying busy with tasks that kept her away from him. He noticed, of course. He noticed everything. On the 3rd day, he found her in the barn collecting eggs and blocked the doorway with his body, arms crossed. Want to tell me what I did wrong? You didn't do anything wrong. Then why are you avoiding me? I'm not avoiding you. I've just been busy. Eliza. He said her name with that particular tone that meant he knew she was lying. Talk to me, please. She set down the egg basket with shaking hands. I can't or won't. Both. She wrapped her arms around herself. I'm sorry. I just need some time to work through something. Xavier was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was gentle. Does this have something to do with how you feel about me? Her head snapped up, eyes wide. How did you? Because I'm going through the same thing. He stepped into the barn, moving slowly. I'm falling in love with you, Eliza. I have been for weeks now. And I'm trying to be patient, trying to give you space and time, but I need to know if there's any chance you might feel the same way. Because if you don't, that's okay. I can live with that. We can keep things as they are. But if you do feel something, if you're just scared because of what happened before, then I need you to know that I would never, ever hurt you the way he did. Eliza felt tears prickling her eyes. I'm terrified. I know. He told me he loved me too at first. He brought me flowers and wrote me poetry and made me feel special. And then after the wedding, everything changed. He said I belonged to him now, that he could do whatever he wanted. How do I know you won't do the same thing? Xavier closed the distance between them carefully, stopping when there were still a few feet separating them. You don't know. Not for certain. I can't prove the future to you. All I can do is show you who I am every single day and hope that eventually you'll believe it. But Eliza, I've been showing you for 3 months now. Have I given you any reason to think I'm like him? No, she admitted. You've been nothing but kind. Then take a chance on me, on us. He held out his hand, palm up, an invitation rather than a demand. I promise I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it. She looked at his hand, work roughened and scarred from years of ranch work, strong enough to break her but offered with such gentleness. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was the moment. She could stay safe behind her walls, or she could risk everything for the possibility of something real. Eliza reached out and placed her hand in his. Xavier's fingers closed around hers carefully, his touch warm and solid. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles with such tenderness that she felt her eyes fill with tears. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for trusting me. He pulled her into his arms slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, he wrapped her in an embrace that felt like coming home. She pressed her face against his chest and let herself cry, great shuddering sobs that released months of tension and fear and grief. He held her through all of it, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring quiet reassurances. When she finally quieted, he tipped her chin up gently. Can I kiss you? The fact that he asked, that he waited for her permission, made her love him even more. Yes. His kiss was soft and careful, reverent almost, nothing demanding or possessive, just the gentle press of his lips against hers. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with emotion. "I love you, Eliza Dalton. I love you too." The words felt like magic, like claiming something she'd thought was lost forever. "I love you, Xavier." They moved her things into his room that night. He'd offered to move into hers instead, but she wanted the fresh start, the symbolic gesture of choosing to share his space. They lay in his bed fully clothed at first, just holding each other, talking in whispers about hopes and dreams and the future they might build together. "I want children someday," Eliza said quietly, "but I'm frightened. What if I'm like him? What if there's something wrong with me that made him that way?" "There's nothing wrong with you. You didn't make him into a violent man. That was his choice." Xavier's arms tightened around her. "And when you're ready, if you're ever ready, we'll have children. And we'll raise them with love and patience, and we'll teach them that strength isn't about hurting people who are weaker than you. It's about protecting them. You're going to be a wonderful father. You're going to be a wonderful mother." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and for the first time in over a year, Eliza didn't have nightmares. The winter was harsh, as Nevada winters often were. Snow fell heavily in December, blanketing the ranch in white and trapping them inside for days at a time. But the isolation felt cozy rather than confining. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading and talking and learning each other's bodies with gentle exploration. Xavier was endlessly patient with her hesitations and fears, never pushing, always letting her set the pace. On Christmas morning, he gave her a beautiful wooden jewelry box he'd carved himself, decorated with an intricate pattern of wildflowers. "I wanted you to have something that was just yours," he explained. "Something beautiful that no one can take away from you." She gave him a new saddle blanket she'd woven in secret, incorporating his ranch brand into the design. "So everyone will know which horse is yours," she said with a smile. They made love that night for the first time, slow and tender, and nothing like what Eliza had experienced in her first marriage. Xavier worshipped her body like it was sacred, kissing every faded scar, murmuring endearments against her skin. When she cried afterward, he held her close and told her he loved her until the tears turned to laughter. Spring arrived in March with the birth of new foals and calves. Eliza discovered she was pregnant in April, exactly a year after Marcus had died. The symmetry felt significant, like the universe offering her a chance to replace death with life. Xavier was overjoyed. He fussed over her constantly, trying to take on all the heavy work himself, worrying about her health. She finally had to sit him down and explain that she was pregnant, not dying, and she was perfectly capable of continuing her normal activities. "I just want to make sure you're safe," he protested. "I am safe, because I'm with you." She took his face in her hands. "Stop worrying so much. We're going to be fine." Their son was born in December, during the first snowstorm of the season. Margaret Burke served as midwife, coaching Eliza through the long labor while Xavier paced anxiously in the next room. When Margaret finally called him in to meet his child, he stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the tiny bundle in Eliza's arms with an expression of absolute wonder. "Come meet your son," Eliza said softly. Xavier approached the bed slowly, reverently, and when she placed the baby in his arms, tears rolled down his weathered cheeks. "He's perfect. You're perfect. God, Eliza, I love you both so much." They named him Daniel, after Xavier's father who died when Xavier was young, before the violence had started. "He was a good man, from what I remember," Xavier explained. "I want our son to carry on the good parts of our families, not the bad." Daniel grew into a sturdy, happy child who looked like his father but had his mother's green eyes. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, whom they named Sarah. Then another son, Michael, and finally another daughter, Rebecca. The house filled with noise and laughter, and the beautiful chaos of a large family. Xavier proved to be exactly the father Eliza had known he would be, patient and playful and unfailingly kind. He taught the children to ride, to care for animals, to treat everyone with respect regardless of their station. He never raised his hand to them, never raised his voice in anger. When they misbehaved, he sat them down and talked through what they'd done wrong and why it mattered. Eliza blossomed over the years, her confidence growing as she realized that this life was real and permanent. She became known throughout Hawthorne as someone you could count on when times were hard, always ready with a meal or a kind word or practical help. She joined Margaret's card group and made friends with the other ranch wives. She learned to shoot and ride as well as any man, capable of defending her home and family if needed. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Xavier's horse breeding program became well known throughout Nevada, and buyers came from as far as California to purchase his stock. Eliza kept meticulous books and managed the finances, proving to have a natural head for numbers. They expanded their land holdings, built a larger house, hired more hands. On their 10th anniversary, Xavier took her on a trip to San Francisco, their first time away from the ranch since Daniel's birth. They stayed in a fancy hotel, ate at expensive restaurants, and walked along the ocean holding hands like newlyweds. "You ever regret it?" Xavier asked one evening as they watched the sun set over the Pacific. "Coming all the way out here to marry a stranger?" "Never." Eliza leaned against his shoulder. "You saved my life, Xavier. You gave me everything I thought I'd lost. A home, a family, safety, love. Real love, the kind that builds up instead of tearing down. You saved mine too." He kissed the top of her head. "I was just existing before you came. Going through the motions. You made everything mean something." They returned to the ranch refreshed and even more committed to the life they were building together. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and dreams. Daniel wanted to be a rancher like his father. Sarah talked about becoming a teacher. Michael was fascinated by anything mechanical and spent hours taking things apart to see how they worked. Rebecca, the youngest, loved animals with a passion that suggested she might become a veterinarian someday. Years passed in the steady rhythm of ranch life. Seasons changed, children grew, the land endured. Eliza's hair started showing threads of silver, and Xavier's beard grew more gray than brown. But their love remained constant, a foundation that supported everything else. On a warm June evening in 1902, 20 years after Eliza had arrived in Hawthorne on that dusty stagecoach, the extended Dalton family gathered on the porch to celebrate Daniel's engagement to a local girl named Catherine. The yard was full of neighbors and friends, laughter and music floating on the desert air. Xavier found Eliza standing slightly apart from the crowd, watching their children with a soft smile. He slipped an arm around her waist and pulled her close. "What are you thinking about? How lucky I am. How different things could have been." She turned in his arms to face him. "Do you remember the day you saw the Bruises, when your voice went so quiet?" "I remember. I wanted to kill him with my bare hands, even though he was already dead. I was terrified. I thought that was the moment you'd realize I wasn't worth the trouble." "Eliza." Xavier cupped her face in his hands. "You have always been worth everything. Every moment, every challenge, every fear we worked through together. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, too." She stood on her toes to kiss him, still finding joy in the simple freedom to love and be loved without fear. "Thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for showing me what love is supposed to look like." Thank you for taking a chance on a lonely cowboy who didn't deserve you." He grinned, that rare, full smile that still made her heart skip. "Though I'm certainly glad you did." They stood there wrapped in each other's arms as the celebration continued around them. Two people who'd found their way to each other through darkness and pain and emerged into light. The desert stretched out before them, harsh and beautiful and unforgiving, the same landscape that had witnessed their tentative beginning now bearing witness to their enduring love. Daniel called for his parents to join the dancing, and Xavier led Eliza into the crowd, spinning her around the yard with surprising grace. Their children laughed and clapped, and their grandchildren would someday hear the story of how their grandmother came to Nevada as a frightened mail-order bride and found not just safety but joy, not just survival but a love that transformed everything it touched. The stars came out one by one as the party continued into the night, brilliant pinpoints of light in the vast Nevada sky. Somewhere in the darkness, coyotes howled their evening song. The horses in the corral nickered softly to each other. The land breathed and lived and continued on, as it always had and always would. And in the center of it all, surrounded by family and friends and the life they'd built together from nothing but hope and determination, Xavier and Eliza Dalton danced under the stars, still in love after 20 years, still grateful for the second chance that had brought them together. The bruises had long since faded, replaced by laugh lines and the marks of a life well lived. The fear had transformed into courage. The pain had given way to peace. She'd arrived in Hawthorne broken and desperate, wearing high collars to hide her shame. She'd found a man who saw beneath the surface to the strength she'd always possessed, who helped her remember that she was worth more than how she'd been treated. Together, they'd built something beautiful and lasting, a legacy of love that would continue long after they were gone. As the music swelled and Xavier pulled her closer, Eliza closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel completely, unreservedly happy. She was home. She was safe. She was loved. And that made all the difference. The ranch hand started a new song, something lively that got everyone moving again. Sarah grabbed her father for a dance while Michael claimed his mother. The celebration went on for hours, nobody wanting the magic of the evening to end. When the guests finally began heading home, calling out their goodbyes and thanks, the Dalton family gathered on the porch one last time. "This was perfect," Catherine said, leaning against Daniel's shoulder. "I hope our wedding is half as nice." "It will be," Eliza assured her. "We'll make sure of it." Xavier squeezed Eliza's hand. "Time for bed, I think. Morning comes early on a ranch." The children dispersed to their rooms, and Xavier and Eliza walked hand in hand to their bedroom. They got ready for bed in comfortable silence, the kind of quiet that comes from years of knowing each other completely. When they finally lay down, Eliza curled against Xavier's side, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," he replied, his voice rumbling through his chest. "Always have, always will." They fell asleep like that, the same way they'd slept for 20 years, wrapped in each other's arms and the absolute certainty of their love. Outside, the Nevada night settled over the ranch, peaceful and calm. Inside, the Dalton family rested, secure in the knowledge that they were exactly where they belonged. The story that had begun with fear and bruises and dangerous quiet had transformed into something beautiful, a testament to the healing power of patience and genuine love. Eliza had learned that not all men were monsters, that it was possible to trust again, to open her heart again. Xavier had learned that sometimes the best things in life came from unexpected places, that taking a chance on a mail-order bride could lead to the greatest love of his life. Together, They'd created a home filled with laughter and warmth, a place where children grew up knowing they were loved unconditionally, where second chances bloomed into happily ever afters. The ranch would continue for generations, passing from parents to children to grandchildren, but the love story of Xavier and Eliza Dalton would remain its foundation, a reminder that even the darkest beginnings could lead to the brightest endings. And as the first light of dawn began to streak the eastern sky, painting the desert in shades of pink and gold, the ranch stirred back to life. Another day was beginning, full of work and challenges and small joys. Xavier woke first, as he always did, and took a moment to watch his wife sleep, her face peaceful in the early morning light. He brushed a kiss against her forehead, soft enough not to wake her, and whispered, "Thank you for choosing me." Eliza smiled in her sleep, some part of her hearing him even in dreams. She'd spent 20 years proving to herself that she'd made the right choice that day in the Hawthorne church, that the quiet cowboy with the gentle hands and fierce protective streak was everything she'd needed and more. And she'd spend the rest of her life being grateful that she'd had the courage to step off that stagecoach, to trust one more time, to believe that love didn't have to hurt. Their story was complete, a circle closed, a journey finished. Two wounded souls had found each other across the vastness of a growing nation and built something lasting and true. The mail-order bride with bruises on her throat and the cowboy whose voice had gone dangerously quiet had become partners, lovers, best friends, and the parents of a beautiful family. And they lived happily ever after, exactly as they deserved.